Monuments, marvels of human ingenuity, beacons of development, of pride for a nation or state, sites of remembrance and historical value that people the world around flock to bask in their beauty. Imagine an alternate history where these pillars of progress house dark secrets within their familiar confines. An alternate world where the unnatural and the supernatural, and even the cosmic, are threads woven into the fabric of this reality, of these so-called monuments and the mythologies that surround them. Alex Casanas, a YouTube channel that came about in October of 2016, began posting a series that's come to be known as the Monument Mythos. This series, infused with elements of cosmic and Lovecraftian horror, leads its viewers through twisting and interlocking historical events, slithering from one structure, from one horrifying revelation to the next. In this ever-expanding reality, Alex Casanas reveals to the world the horrifying truths behind the ever-imposing monuments. The following is an extract from an 1889 interview with Frederick Auguste Bartholdi regarding the construction of the Statue of Liberty. The rest of the entry is in regard to the supposed blueprints of the Statue of Liberty, highlighting the internal workings of this iconic American monument. As well as a foul odor emanating from the monument during the summer of 1954, and strange occurrences witnessed by one Eleonora Bramante.
Era orribile. L'intero posto puzzava di carne, come un mattatoio. La mia famiglia aveva spruzzato profumo e acceso candele per tenere lontano il fetore, ma funzionava solo per un'ora o giù di lì, finché l'aria diventava di nuovo insopportabile. Ricordo che guardavo fuori dalla finestra ogni notte e vedevo file di persone che venivano condotte alla Statua della Libertà dai funzionari. Se solo fossero saliti sul piedistallo, i funzionari se ne sarebbero andati e non sarebbe successo nient'altro. La mattina seguente però ci sarebbe stato un odore peggiore, come un mattatoio.
This all culminates in the first sighting of the Liberty Lurker in August of 1985. Liberty Lurker introduces us to a horrifying entity living within the confines of the Statue of Liberty's pedestal. As immigrants pass through Ellis Island, some were diverted to the monument, being fed or sacrificed to some entity dwelling beneath the many layers of concrete. However, with the closure of Ellis Island, it seems that any operation regarding the feeding of this entity must have ceased as well, leading to the entity to emerge from the depths of the pedestal in 1985. What happens next is unclear. We will, however, hear of this entity again. In 2003, Mount Rushmore was vandalized with cryptic messages. Every day, executions occur on 2,600 American landmarks. The blood of liberty will be avenged, and the US government can fund mass murder if it's labeled as a national monument. References to the Liberty Lurker video and the mass killing of individuals to appease these or this entity. Later, in 2003, another message appears stating, "I will introduce infection next week, Monday through Sunday, 10:12 to 10:13 p.m. Watch the symptoms." The next few clips detail the monument of the next several days at the specified times. Flashing lights on Tuesday. Strange noises on Wednesday. Strange figures on Thursday and Friday. Strange noises again on Saturday. And something truly strange on Sunday. Alcatraz attacks begin with the blueprints of Alcatraz Island before shifting to a photograph of the alien with the text, "One day before therapy." Alcatrazosis is then presented on screen, along with an animation detailing the affliction and a dose of radiation therapy that proves ineffective in curing the island of its ailments. Alcatraz attacks details just that. Some sort of cosmic affliction has spread throughout the structure while it was still a functioning prison. In the projected movement section, the island rotates and shifts slowly over the course of 2 decades. But after the closure of the island in 1968, Alcatraz begins to move towards the San Francisco coast, growing, spreading, until the infected regions extend to western Texas. The nature of this entity, of this condition the island has, is entirely unknown at this point. On August 17, 2003, Air Force One makes an unannounced trip across the continental United States. Many civilians claim to have seen the aircraft drop packages on various national monuments. As the packages land at their destinations, the outlines of states appear to disappear into darkness. And within the aircraft, something otherworldly. Air Force One was shot down over Washington, D.C. The archivist notes that it remains a mystery as to how this so-called angel bypassed the security systems and made its way on board. What exactly the entity is unclear at this point. Whatever dropped over the monuments seen in previous videos appears to have spread out into the United States. Lincoln Looker begins with a testimony from Maya Arnoldson, a former Lincoln Looker, recounting her traumatic experiences within an act or role called a Lincoln Looker.
You're stuck in some kind of suit. The only thing you can do is look through 2 little holes. It was some kind of mask, and whenever the sun shined near, I could see the inside of it. It was a familiar face. Every few nights, straws would be put through the holes, and someone would feed me some weird soup. After 2 weeks, they found out that they had misidentified me, and I wasn't the correct Lincoln Looker. Reagan apologized to me personally, and I was released with some monetary compensation. They don't care if I talk about it or not. No one would take me seriously. Lincoln looking is just too absurd.
Former senior advisor Leonard W. Moreland gives us some much-needed background on the exact nature of this role, but his explanation gives us more questions than answers.
You've done something that's affected us personally. Often you're the only person who remembers this act. It may not have been that bad, but memory hurts. Everyone experiences this, and the president is no exception. Except he can do something about it. Every president can choose one person to be a Lincoln Looker. After the alibi is fabricated, the person is abducted from their home, and they stay a Lincoln Looker for as long as the president sits in office. Nobody can question his decision, and there's no trial. You might be surprised, but it's nothing new. It's been a tradition. Lincoln Lookers have been around for a very long time.
Next, we have a phone call from a Howard Melrose, a visitor, who documents his experiences with something within the Lincoln Memorial.
Hey Eunice, it's Howard. I don't know what I just saw. I was at the top of the steps, reading the inscriptions and talking to visitors, when I started to hear a faint scratching sound. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I got close to the chair, I realized that the scratching was coming from inside the marble. So I went to a guard and asked whether she could do anything about animals that could be trapped in there. She told me not to worry about it, and that they'd take care of it once there were fewer visitors. A few minutes passed, and the scratching became much louder. I went back to the guard and asked what kind of animals usually got stuck in there, and she said, wild animals. A blind girl with one of those canes went up to the chair and pressed her head against it to listen. Then she started crying. Her parents tried to pull her away, but she just began to hit the chair with her cane. I don't know why, and it's going to sound crazy, but I felt compelled to help. So I went to the blind girl and joined her in hitting the marble. Eventually the marble began to crack, and a few more hits caused the crevice to expand all the way to the top of the chair. There was a sudden burst of air from the damage, and the head suddenly turned toward us. The head slowly rotated back into place, and when it started to be pushed upwards, I took out my camera. It was no wild animal.
First, we have individuals being selected by presidents to be abducted and placed within what appears to be the Lincoln Memorial. The primary question is, why? The rationale for placing someone inside the Lincoln Memorial is incredibly strange and nonsensical. What purpose is there for this tradition, as Leonard Moreland calls it? It is clearly well known enough that the general public discusses it almost as a conspiracy theory more than well-known fact. And what is this special soup being fed to people within the Lincoln Memorial? And when the marble finally cracks in Howard Melrose's testimony, is that a human hand that reaches out, or something else entirely? The content of the video revolves around a news anchor by the name of Peter Jennings of the ABC Evening News, who drew in viewers after announcing a special broadcast of national significance that would be the most unprecedented announcement in recent history. Nearly 60 million Americans listened in on the special night, anxiously awaiting the announcement hyped up over the previous 7 days.
What are we waiting for? Let's bring them back home.
American actor James Dean announced his presidential campaign, a campaign that instantly drew millions of supporters across the United States. His influential ads would air every Friday evening on ABC, becoming the highest-rated television show at the time. Despite pushback from anti-Dean groups, including some rather macabre attack ads,
James Dean is no man.
James Dean continued to rally support that ultimately culminated in his election to the office of president. At his inaugural address, Dean had only this to say to the American public.
I have a speech, and it has the flotsam that you people expect to hear. But that's not fair. No, that's not fair at all. I'm here for all of you. It's only fair that you speak for yourselves. My words shouldn't be louder than yours. So I brought many other guests to speak. They're just people like you and I. In the same time that many other presidents have spoken by themselves, America will speak. Thank you.
On April 20th, 1969, Dean began a broadcast to inform Americans on his first 90 days in office, when the broadcast lost audio. During this portion, viewers appeared to have taken to his sincere facial expressions, only furthering his popularity. Having James Dean as the 37th President of the United States is an interesting historical departure, especially considering the actor died in September of 1955, a good 13 years before the timeline's presidential campaign. The campaign itself appears cult-like and hypnotic, with the broadcasts themselves pulling powerful positive emotions from those who watch. Considering the parties in the 30-minute rerun of a 10-second ad, Dean himself is generating a cult of personality, acting as a quote, cognito hazard to pull from SCP terminology. Simply put, the act of watching the ad, listening to Dean himself, or even just seeing Dean is enough to seemingly influence an individual to support Dean's campaign and cause through Dean's seemingly cosmic sphere of influence. The imagery of James Dean as the Antichrist cannot be ignored as well. The magnetic pull of his personality, the way people become enraptured with his campaign within moments, and the fervent pushback against those who see him as not a Christ-like figure, but as a false prophet destined to plunge the world into chaos. Only time will tell how this illusion holds up, and if James Dean truly is the false prophet the ADA makes him out to be.
The forest fell swiftly as the lumberjack swung, except for the special tree, which could not be stung. She missed her friends and the hymns they sung, so she started a tune that broke the man's lung.
In 1840, the special tree was photographed for the first time. In 1848, the Washington Monument began to be constructed around this special tree. Between 1861 and 1865, construction halted due to the Civil War, and prisoners of war are led into the unfinished tower, never to be seen again. In 1888, construction of the Washington Monument was completed. In 1910, advertisements drawing visitors to the monument are all around the United States, having tourists listening closely to the walls of the monument for the sounds of music within the structure. Between 1910 and 1971, 20 individuals of various races, ages, and apparent backgrounds went missing while visiting the monument. These 20 are known as the Washington Absentees. In 1972, Washington's standard operation, a classified film, is leaked by news agencies, what deepens the mystery of the American monument. In 2000, a vandal writes, "The infection is nigh. The music of Washington will end." And finally, in 2003, all 19 of the Washington absentees are discovered unconscious at the base of the Washington Monument. Let's start at the beginning. At some point in the past, a lumberjack began cutting down a forest wherein the special tree resided. Seeing all of its friends cut down, the special tree let out some sort of tune or noise, causing the man's lungs to break. Knowing that this tree, if it even is a tree, has special abilities, the United States government began constructing what would eventually be known as the Washington Monument around it. During this brief pause caused by the Civil War, Confederate prisoners of war were fed to the special tree. Later down this timeline, it appears that the tune that the special tree once sang can still be heard within the walls of the monument, even being marketed as a neat feature of the location. The usage of 10 cents per head is certainly interesting phrasing. 20 individuals, with only 19 photographs featured, vanished over the course of a 60-year period, only for 19 of them to appear in 2003 at the base of the monument. Given the title of the video, the special tree has wormhole or time travel-like capabilities, sending these individuals to the same place and time. Archivist notes reveal that the 20th Washington absentee has been identified, but no more information is given. The same vandal that defaced Mount Rushmore has written similar graffiti over the Washington Monument, discussing the previously mentioned infection once again. And in 2003, the special tree appears to have awoken, bursting from the confines of the monument and radiating a bright beacon of light. Delaware Double follows a new style informational video detailing the discovery of a person trapped within ice by two fishermen, Rolf Grasserman and Michael Tillen. The person, despite being trapped in ice, appeared to be alive, and soon enough, the pair come upon a peculiar revelation.
Tim exclaimed in shock when he reportedly saw the individual's eyelid twitch. Grassman suggested to immediately take the body home and attempt to revive the frozen man. They proceeded to carry it back to Grassman's apartment. They laid the body in a full bathtub, gradually raising the water's temperature throughout the night to prevent shock. At 2 a.m. the following morning, Tillen claimed that the individual briefly regained consciousness and shouted, "Victory or death," while Grassman rested in the living room. When we first dug him out, we moved his clothes so that we could carry him more easily. Clothes weighed a ton because they were completely frozen over. By then, if we saw the clothes without ice, then we could have no doubt that we dug out George Washington. Grassman believes that the man he dug out from the ice is the true George Washington, and that the former president had become gravely ill while crossing the Delaware River. Grassman claims that the imminent death of Washington could have been devastating to the war effort, so his condition was likely kept secret by having a double acting as the president until 1797, and asked for an explanation to why the body had been found so far from the site of the battle. Grassman replied, he either drifted away or his men purposely planted it far away so that no one could find it. During Saturday's morning press conference, President Dean shared his thoughts on the discovery in 2 words. I'm surprised.
It appears that, at least to Grassman, that the real George Washington was ill and his supposed death was covered up while crossing the Delaware, with a body double standing in his place for the foreseeable future, and that the individual Grasserman and Tillen dug out of the ice is in fact the real Washington. It seems as though, in this alternate reality, George Washington may have become frozen in ice for some 200 years before being revived in Rolf Grasserman's bathtub. What exactly this means for the series is unclear at this time. The name Tillen appears in 2 other of Kansas' series, the Corner Folk series, and a few experimental videos, in the form of Eli and Riley Tillen. The story, told through 2 interwoven narratives, relay the Rockefeller Tree Tragedy, pulled from a recollection of the tragedy by John D. Rockefeller in 1937. The narrative describes the construction of the Rockefeller Center in New York City and the placing of a Christmas tree amongst the construction grounds. The following story details the perspective of Rockefeller searching for a tree in a forest from the perspective of a young girl named Virginia.
Then, on the 12th night, just as he was packing up his stuff, Mr. Rockefeller heard the sweetest tune in the air. It sounded as though the very wind itself had fallen in love. He and his men followed the song and found themselves at the base of a very, very special tree. How about this?
Rockefeller eventually finds the special tree and demands it be used as the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. After 3 years of digging around the impenetrable bark, the tree is finally transported to the center in December of 1934. Tragedy soon follows. Virginia watched as Rockefeller's men decorated the tree, anxiously awaiting for an opportunity for her to place a star atop the special tree. Unable to reach the top on her own, Virginia enlists the help of her friends. After placing the star on top of the tree, the special tree bends and begins to flash with white light, similar to its behavior in Washington Wormhole, and strikes Virginia.
I remember when my eyes adjusted, I was in a field of special trees, and I saw...
Suddenly, Virginia's returned to Rockefeller Center, one that appears slightly different from the one she disappeared from.
I looked up at the Rockefeller buildings, and I thought that they looked a little different. The whole street looked a little different, and the special tree was nowhere in sight.
Rockefeller remarks that, while no loss of life occurred, the children who returned from this alternate dimension experienced medical anomalies.
For some time, but when I encountered the results of the children's medical examinations, I wished that a death had occurred in place of the unfathomable.
My ma and pa visited me at the hospital, but they looked completely different. Pa asked, "Where did you get these clothes?" I answered, "These are my clothes, the ones you helped me put on this morning." To which they asked, "What do you mean?" My ma then asked, "Why are there dots all over your face?" I answered, "Those are my freckles. I've had them since I was little." To which they asked, "What do you mean?" My parents quietly left my bed and talked to my friends' parents. Then they all started to cry and yell. The nurses made them leave, which made me feel better. None of us thought that our real parents had visited, but they all did feel familiar. Orville and Philip were especially shaken. They didn't even share the same last name with their parents. Whenever I looked out the window, I saw that Manhattan looked different from memory. Mr. Rockefeller himself was kind enough to visit us in the hospital. He asked us whether we were okay, and then after some time, he and the nurses began to ask us some very easy questions about American history. With every reply, they would chuckle and shake their heads, until I told Mr. Rockefeller who I thought he was. He chuckled at first, and then became silent, as if the simple fact had deeply affected him. He had asked all my friends a few more questions about himself, and with each answer, he seemed a little more scared. Mr. Rockefeller quietly stood with the nurses for a while, before he wished us a Merry Christmas and left. That evening, the nurses took x-rays of us to make sure we hadn't broken our ribs. Usually, those taking the x-rays are more than happy to show their patients what the pictures looked like. When I asked to see them, the nurses...
Virginia begins to detail these strange occurrences following their return. However, Virginia never really returned, at least, not to her Earth. Even her anatomy differs from the humans in this reality, appearing backwards.
All the families of these children were deeply unsettled, for they had all independently come to the conclusion their child had been replaced by a doppelganger. Each of the affected children claimed that I had become the wealthiest man in America through an oil monopoly. It is common knowledge that I did indeed work at an oil refinery in my youth, but to entirely deny my 2 terms as president and insist instead that I had always been a mere philanthropist struck me as being particularly odd. Every day I'd find myself recollecting the day that I had selected the tree. I have since realized the difficulties involved in the removal of it should have repeatedly discouraged me. And had I been discouraged, the families of those children would not be experiencing the anguish that they currently have. Perhaps I never had the opportunity to select another tree. Perhaps I was meant to select that tree, regardless of my persistent character. Perhaps we are all trolleys, forced to follow the path of the track to each of our destinations. I take solace in that thought. Or perhaps the tree chose me.
Rockefeller Jr. mentioned the special tree never having disappeared, that it still roams the streets of New York City, looking more man than tree. Rockefeller Tree Tragedy establishes key details in the monument mythology. First, the special tree's capabilities are better understood. Not only is the tree capable of sending individuals forwards and likely backwards in time, but it transports individuals onto entirely different planes of reality. Whether this is another dimension, an entirely new reality, or a location entirely unique, it serves as a waypoint between different realities. Inside this dimension, Virginia sees rows after row of these special trees, along with the revelation that these are not trees at all. Virginia and her friends, after being transported into this dimension, emerge in a reality not of their own. And the version of Virginia originally present in this reality wound up in another reality as well. This transporting to another reality altogether also implies that the 19 Washington absentees that reappeared in 2003 are also not of this reality, but of another one entirely. Why they all collectively emerge at the same time is unknown, and raises more questions than answers. The question remains as to why special trees transport individuals away. Is it to feed on the energy created by ripping through space-time? Is it simply acting out of base instinct, an act of self-defense? Hopefully, future videos will shed light on the nature of these special trees. CANYONCROWN follows the Arnoldson family vacation to the Grand Canyon. While there, the family sees a strange object floating in the sky. This object, blurry and undefined, made the entire location smell of vinegar. The object appears once again, this time inside the canyon itself. The creature is later identified as a CANYONCROWN, or canyon crown, which uses vinegar to shrink its head. The narrator mentions going to the canyon to find his father's sister, her Aunt Maya. The narrator ends by stating that the CANYONCROWN likely is Maya. The ending montage shows individuals without heads, and two men walking down a trail labeled Head Off Trail. In terms of additions to lore or plot development, this entry adds a unique set of entities. The concept of the CANYONCROWN is inspired by the Penangal or the Penanggalan of Malay ghost myths. This nocturnal vampiric apparition is depicted as the floating head of a woman with entrails and organs still attached. The entity would soak its entrails in vinegar to shrink them down to fit back into their body, which would allow them to resume their normal daily life. If this is the case, it would make sense for these canyon crowns to soak in vinegar to shrink back down. Judging from the photographs and the head-off trail, it appears that some specific instance of head loss results in becoming a canyon crown. If so, then is the use of vinegar to shrink their heads for the purpose of returning to their bodies? Freedomfaller. A story told in 6 parts, revolving around a statue by the name of Freedom. Part 1. Sculptor. A series of telegrams sent in 1858 discussed the commissioning of a statue from the Italian sculptor Thomas Crawford by Thomas U. Walter and Montgomery Meigs in Washington, D.C. After the approval of the design, and roughly 9 weeks later, the plaster cast is completed, but at the cost of Crawford's life. Part 2. Daughter. Crawford's daughter Nina, after learning of her father's work on the statue, requests that it resemble her. Crawford obliges. Detective Zaffino, seen previously, arrives to relay the news of Crawford's death, with Mrs. Crawford exclaiming, "It has his eyes." Nina stows away on the ship carrying Freedom to the United States, feeling the statue holds an essence of her father. During the boat ride, Freedom slowly breaks free from the boxes and reassembles itself. On April 29th, Freedom rips through the hull of the ship with Nina and heads inland from the port of Gibraltar, slicing down trees with its sword. The living statue hides the pair in a cave for a short while, giving Nina time to write in her journal. Part 3. Captain. The captain of the Monarca describes the appearance of multiple holes in the ship's hull before stopping in Gibraltar. Part 4. Commissioner. The ensuing narration describes the police investigation into the massive felling of trees at the hands of a then unknown force. The investigation leads them to an offshoot of St. Michael's Cave.
In the middle of the location stood a plaster model of a tall Greco-Roman statue of a woman. Surrounding this sculpture were the splayed remains of an individual, flattened like a set of clothes.
A hollowed-out torso is stretched a quarter way up the statue. The only remains of Nina, save for her journal. Part 5. Craftsman. Upon arriving in the United States, the Freedom plaster is hidden within a giant woman. Before leaving the port of Gibraltar, the Freedom statue came into conflict with the crew and the police, and at some point, obtained the body parts it needed to be fully formed. Despite this, Freedom is defeated and locked away on the ship. The craftsman is tasked with tearing away the flesh and revealing the plaster. And once he does, the Freedom statue goes dormant. Part 6. Sculpture. A group of anti-Dean protesters storm Washington, D.C., shooting the Freedom statue down from the dome of the Capitol building. The statue falls and smashes into the roof of a portion of the building. Freedom awakens from its dormant state. The video ends with screaming abruptly ending, and the sounds of the plaster moving and skin stretching, before a pale white face appears in the doorway. From creation to sentience to transportation to liberation, the video follows the Freedom statue as it makes its way to the United States. Thomas Crawford originally designed the statue to look like his daughter, and at some point in the difficult process of creating the plaster, lost his eyes and his life to the statue. Nina mentions feeling her father's spirit around the statue, possibly implying that Thomas imbued his own soul into the statue itself. However, this is speculation at this point. While in Gibraltar, it appears that the statue kills Nina, along with several other individuals, until it eventually crafts itself a body. The video mentions this as a desperate act for liberation, possibly as a push for more autonomy. And in the end, we see Freedom awaken from its dormant state and likely take yet another life. Monuments around the United States house dark secrets. The Statue of Liberty holds a monstrous entity desiring human sacrifice that will begin to lurk if left unfed for too long. Alcatraz Island suffers from a strange and bloodthirsty condition that has led the island to multiply. The Washington Monument houses a special tree capable of transporting individuals through time and through realities, while also demanding similar sacrifices. Another special tree also appears in Rockefeller Center in 1934, transporting 10 children into an alternate reality, and still roams NYC to this day. The history told in this narrative is distinctly different from our own. George Washington falls into water in 1776 while crossing the Delaware River, and is replaced by stand-in to keep the war morale up, and is discovered 200 years later frozen in ice. John D. Rockefeller, rather than being an oil tycoon, is instead the President of the United States. James Dean, the American actor who died in 1955 in our timeline, is alive and well, and the 37th President of the United States in this timeline. His magnetic campaign overlaps with a cult of personality and ventures into the territory of supernatural influence. While also maintaining solid support, he also gains staunch oppositionists. Ascension statue sits atop the Capitol building, but after it is shot off, awakens from its dormant state, and begins wreaking havoc. In August of 2003, the Air Force Angel hijacked the Air Force One, flew over Mount Rushmore, Alcatraz Island, the Statue of Liberty, and possibly the Washington Monument, dropping packages onto the monuments. These packages likely contain the infections spoken of and vandalisms that occurred in the timeline's recent years. This infection has begun to warp and shift the monuments, causing Mount Rushmore to develop protruding spikes, for Alcatraz to multiply and spread inland, and for the Statue of Liberty's Liberty Lurker to possibly awaken. Why this angel chose to spread this infection is unclear, but the effects have been devastating and wide-reaching. By 2022, much of the United States is caught in the influence of this infection. Season 2 of the Monument Mythos begins with an advert for the Maze personal computer, with the Maze Movie Maker having been seen in previous entries. The video then cuts to the Maze manufacturing plants operational between 1960 and 1971. In 1971, an outbreak is reported on all Maze personal computers. An outbreak so severe that all Fourth Amendment rights are waived in this instance. The video then cuts to the history of Maze and President Dean's establishment of the Department of Technology in 1969 for the purpose of advancing America's technological capabilities. Maze collaborates with the Department of Defense in what is known as Project Horned Serpent, an operation intended to initiate the first system to control the True Forces of Mass Destruction, or TFMDs. In 1980, Maze is attacked. In 1990, the last American personal computer is shut down due to the rampaging virus. Despite this, in the year 2000, Maze begins rolling out Maze Movie Maker. The next segment gives us a tour of a Maze factory. With a person recording writing graffiti on the walls. Beware the monuments. They are all connected. The person recording enters a human cave with another individual. This entry better introduces the seemingly antagonistic corporation under the name of MAIZE. This company is responsible for the creation of personal computers, ones that carried some sort of virus or infection that negatively impacted the country on a grand scale and led to the technological regression of the United States in this timeline. MAIZE also worked in collaboration with the United States Department of Technology, established by President Dean. This seems to hint at President Dean's desire to control the monuments. Whether this control is for the greater good or for his own self-interests is unclear at this point. The company worked on Project Horned Serpent in order to control or tap into the TFMDs, which are likely the monuments themselves. Let's stop and discuss Project Horned Serpent. The map lays out the factory sites at key locations relating to the monuments seen throughout the series, ultimately creating the geographic constellation, the shape of the Horned Serpent. The iconography of the Horned Serpent is nearly identical to the join or die imagery used before and during the American Revolutionary War. The image commented on the disunity in the 13 American colonies, with the revolutionaries calling for the unification to fight against the perceived tyrannical threat. What's interesting to take note of is the fact that British loyalists, those clinging to old powers, associated the cartoon with deceit and treachery. This shares striking similarities to events unfolding in the series. President Dean wanting to, at least on the surface, take control of the monuments or the true forces of mass destruction in order to prevent their power and appetites from destroying the country. Similarly, the anti-Dean opposition sees his rule as one filled with treachery and deceit, a rule that must be pushed back against and whose lies must be revealed, once again feeding into the deceit of a false prophet, as mentioned earlier in the video. This brings us to the iconography of the Horned Serpent specifically. Two different interpretations of note popped up in my research. First is the Iroquois legend of the Onyare, commonly called the Horned Serpent, which is a dragon-like horned serpent lurking in the Great Lakes to capsize canoes and eat people. Its breath is often said to be poisonous. In some Iroquois traditions, the Onyare would spare travelers who made offerings to it. The name Onyare simply means snake in Mohawk. Onyarekoa means great snake. The second usage of the horned serpent is associated with the Gallo-Roman deity Cernunnos. A horned deity, Cernunnos is sometimes depicted with a horned serpent as well, with the deity's actual cosmic role shifting around over the years. However, at one point, the deity was depicted as the god of travel, commerce, and bidirectionality. We are also reintroduced to two faceless characters, Maya and Nathaniel Arnoldson, two characters seen in the Season 1 entry, CANYONCROWN. The pair are responsible for the graffiti seen throughout the series, and the warnings presented to the world and to the viewer. The recording is one of the many abandoned MAIZE factories, each housing a cosmic monstrosity within, leading to the final warning from the Arnoldson siblings to stay away. As one final note, the opening of the factory stopped in 1971, the same year that the Washington absentee disappearances halted as well. This entry has a longer runtime. It details the very real blocking of the Suez Canal in March of 2021, only with an interesting twist. President Clinton, at the behest of the Egyptian government, is granted a nuclear option to clear the obstruction. The nuclear blast dislodges the boat, but the ship just kind of walks away. It appears that the boat, now dubbed the SUEZCANALCRAB, is protected by the UN due to the cargo the boat is carrying. Any attempt at retrieving said cargo has been unsuccessful. Efforts are put into place to manipulate its path, but the crab eventually makes its way to Cairo.
Upwards of 1,200 visitors toured the Cairo Tower at once.
The Cairo Tower, now filled with people wanting to watch the crab go by, was hit by the crab after it stumbled. Containers fell along with the crab and the tower, leaving only 39 visitors alive.
Estimated 800 containers broke from their locks and pushed forward an additional 1,000 containers. As all 1,800 containers tumbled down through the building, the structural integrity of the Cairo Tower rapidly diminished. Falling debris.
The crab and the ship separated and led to a massive flooding due to a mixture of seawater and bodily fluids gushing from the crab. This led to an extremely slippery area unsuitable for walking. The Cairo exclusion zone is subsequently established. International turmoil and conspiracies arose in the ensuing days, including calls for American citizens to go to Cairo and take the goods left in the exclusion zone. Soon, the zone itself fell. Officials observed the Americans at the epicenter, at the Crab. The zone became a bloodbath as citizens turned on one another over the goods found inside the containers. 77 of the 12,000 Americans survived, having been told to pray to the Crab as though it were a deity in order to survive. Afterwards, the Church of the Ever Given is established. Dean Disaster details the ever-growing anti-Dean opposition within the country, with a broadcast of the country showing this.
James Dean's America is hell. But you still don't believe us. You'll hear the truth from James Dean himself.
Sirens blared following the ad, bursting the eardrums of individuals within a 4-mile radius. President Dean discovers that no nuclear weapons had been launched, but that the air raid siren system had been hijacked by an anti-Dean domestic terror group. Bodies of technicians attempting to disable the sirens piled high. The streets were littered with unaccompanied running cars blocking roadways, and many civilians lost their hearing permanently, including President Dean.
Quickly, Dean sustained permanent ear damage and was rendered fully deaf.
An announcement made later the same day called for the hunting of the Anti-Dean Association, labeling them an anti-American association. Those found guilty were taken to correctional facilities near or on national monuments as a metaphorical return to American values. These individuals would return with different values, no recollection of their criminal activities, and slightly altered physical appearances. The Maze Corporation is introduced, which details the creation of a device to restore President Dean's hearing, which became a success. This led to Dean to create the Department of Technology in 1969. Americans were then eligible to receive hearing devices free of charge due to the terror attack. The video gives more background information and lore surrounding the creation of the Department of Technology and how the Maze Corporation came into the limelight. First, we see the terror attack by the Anti-Dean Association. Dean is sending the anti-Dean sympathizers into other realities and pulling different versions of these individuals into his own to eradicate opposition, to quote, rehabilitate the supposed criminals, and to further cement his power. What specifically President Dean wants and what the Maze Corporation wants is unclear, but whatever force destroyed Maze and whatever the end goal Project Horned Serpent is will likely reveal these endgames. It's also possible that the ADA is also attempting to destroy the hearing of Americans for a very specific reason, to prevent them from hearing the music of the special trees. STARRYSPHINX takes the series outside of the continental United States and into the sands of Egypt once more. This interview summarizes the excavation of the Egyptian monuments and their classifications as TFMDs by the United States government, which required immediate action. Lore is given regarding the construction of the pyramids, ancient guardians of the monuments and their Giza glass blades with supernatural properties, and their role in inhibiting the growth of the special trees in order to build around them and contain them.
They will be able to hit the trees for several nights in a row. The goal was not to cut down any of the trees, of course. That wouldn't be possible until 1945. Rather, the intention was to shift the tree's focus from upward growth to internal repairs. The ancient Egyptians knew that they could not permanently halt the tree's germination, but by prolonging their growth, the Egyptians bought themselves time to build enormous towers that would better contain the trees.
Subsequent excavation revealed that the pyramids extend deep into the earth, considered to be extending infinitely downwards.
And we've been wrong the whole time. The pyramids extend on its-wise. You imagine our reluctance to tell the public that the pyramids were not pyramids at all. They were towers, infinite towers, all three of them, towers which contain enormous species of metaphysical flora. Who knew that the pyramids were merely the tips of buildings?
Along with the interview, Interwoven videos tell the story of a TFMD escaping from Mars and falling to Earth. The TFMD is attacked as it enters Earth's atmosphere, but this does little to deter the monument. Video number 7 details what is known as the TFMD's false children land as 4 balls of light organize around the Sphinx head before erupting into a bright flash of light. These, quote, false children organize into the starry Sphinx, a constellation-like sphinx that roamed the night's horizon. This only served as a distraction for the, quote, mothership to escape. Ensuing videos detail the rising of the Great Pyramids, rising into the sky as white obelisks of infinite magnitude. A diagram helps to illustrate the situation unfolding just outside of Cairo. Hundreds of pyramids turned obelisks, rising into the sky, with the Sphinx in the center. Starry Sphinx complicates the lore even further. First, the encapsulation of the special trees appears to have occurred for a few thousand years, with ancient societies constructing their own ancient monuments to contain their sphere of influence. Judging from the amount of pyramids turned obelisks seen at the end of the video, this implies that the trees are propagating and spreading at a rate that the ancient Egyptians struggled to control. This also connects to the same technique used in the United States, a la the Washington Monument, to contain the special tree. We also have the introduction of Giza glass, a kind of special material that allows the wielder to negate the effects of fatigue from swinging axes. Second, the introduction of apparent alien species also shifts the lore. Not only are there cosmic forces at play, but it appears extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional entities or civilizations are interfering in Earth's affairs. These false children, the balls of light seen coming from the Sphinx itself, appear to be the acolytes of the TFMD. Are they the extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings operating this colossal machine, or are they simply tools? Next, we have the appearance of Leonard W. Moreland, the former senior advisor to the Dean administration, seen in the LINCOLNLOOKER video. He appears to be a leaker of sorts, spilling information otherwise kept under wraps thus far. This entire video, interview and videos included, were supplied by the Anti-Device Association, the name having evolved from the Anti-Dean Association seen in previous videos. Lastly, we have the introduction of the Guardians. These are individuals tasked with managing the growth of the special trees, using the mythologized Giza glass blades. What their continuing purpose will be is unclear by this point in the series, but will be revealed in the next video. Giza Guardian continues a plotline established in Starry Sphinx. The video begins with an announcement of a live feed of the Starry Sphinx on July 4th, hosted by the Maze News Network. Towards the end of the live feed, the false children appear to be freeing or emulating the special trees. These lights form the arc of the special trees and flash with a familiar bright lightning as the feed cuts. The video cuts to a video created by the familiar Dr. Disturbing. The video covers peculiar lightning strikes that hit around the pyramids of Giza in the presence of rare stellar constellations. Giza glass is noted to be created when struck by this peculiar lightning. British Egyptologist Flinders Petrie accurately predicted and collected large sheets of Giza glass. Unfortunately, Petrie slipped and was decapitated by one sheet of glass. However, Petrie's head remained alive and began to swell and discolor. Upon arrival in the United Kingdom, the Giza glass was found to be broken, so the remnants were given to American ambassadors. President Rockefeller, aware of the properties of the glass, confiscated the shards from his ambassadors. These shards of glass were fashioned into plates to be given to Greco-Roman statues. They guarded the Grand Canyon for years until they were discontinued. Despite the US government claiming the Giza Guardian project was discontinued in 1969, individuals still claim to see the Guardians in the canyon. Those injured by the Guardians were promised special concoctions of vinegar to manage the side effects. When this began to fail, these individuals were given housing in the Grand Canyon for privacy and safety. An audio clip from Louisa Crawford, the widow of the sculptor of freedom, gives background on how Thomas Crawford went about creating freedom and how the statue gained its supernatural properties. Crawford wanted freedom to be a symbol of just that. As a pushback against the United States institution of slavery, Crawford went to Egypt to obtain Giza glass to craft Freedom's sword. While sharpening the sword, Thomas cut his finger off, but found he could still move it despite being detached. Over time, Thomas began to cut up his body and place it inside Freedom. Inside the statue, Thomas still lives, and so does his daughter, Nina. Freedom is mentioned to have fallen during the January 6th ADA riot, in which the statue killed around 150 people before the statue was moved to the Grand Canyon.
Has instead transferred Freedom to an undisclosed location in the Grand Canyon, subject to all.
A file is noted to have been released by journalist Howard Melrose, who now lives in exile in Egypt. This file, labeled STFR 4.3099, is a plan to attract and extinguish Anti-Dean Association members and other persons of interest in order to protect May's assets. The ensuing diagram shows the Freedom statue decapitating individuals at the Grand Canyon, including one Maya Arnoldson. Recorded are her last words.
No, not now. I'm leaving now. I won't bother you.
This was in 2004, and by 2021, her head remains missing. This entry reveals a lot of information and answers several questions carried over from Season 1. The false children, these extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings, appear directly tied to the special trees. Either they imitated the trees or pulled them from the sands in order to create the lighting seen at the end. The supernatural properties of Giza glass are also expanded upon. Being decapitated by a Giza glass sword turns the victim into a canyon crown, entities mentioned in the Canyon Crown video. This ties to the floating head seen at the end of the FREEDOMFALLER video, with the inflated head being that of a victim of Freedom's Giza glass sword. On the topic of freedom, we now know that Freedom is not its own sentient entity, but the combined spirits of both Thomas and Nina Crawford, the former having incorporated the latter's body into Freedom's plaster to achieve a form of eternal life. The pair continue to attack and decapitate American civilians as a lasting impression of Thomas's hatred towards American slavery. And within the canyon, we see how Maya Arnoldson became a canyon crown, and why her brother was spurred into searching for her, likely in an attempt to gather information, such as in the MAIZEMOVIEMAKER video. Maya crosses paths with the statue and loses her head. Maya's transformation appears to be part of a larger scheme concocted by the federal government and the Maze Corporation to silence anti-Dean turned anti-device opposition. Fallen Father is another short entry stylized with an at-home movie maker software associated with the MAIZEMOVIEMAKER machine. The video begins with innocuous animal footage before diving into a heartfelt message to the narrator's father, Nathaniel Arnoldson, who appears to have died. And as the person recording shuts the window, the looming shadow of a canyon crown on just the other side. Throughout the video, we see the visage of the canyon crown, whether obscured by the leaves of a tree or the curtain of a window. The ominous presence is no less frightening. We now know that both of the Arnoldson siblings have passed, with Maya and possibly even Nathaniel as well becoming canyon crowns. Whether the outline shown as Nathaniel turned canyon crown, or Maya herself having followed the family home, is unclear. The video also serves as a memorial for the creator's father, who has since passed. Thank you for your wonderful series, and I'm truly sorry for your loss. Stylized as another Dr. Disturbing video, this entry details what are referred to as the Rockefeller tapes. President Rockefeller once again narrates his experiences, noting his shame and disappointment at his name being used to refer to German airships and for secret dealings with the German government. This video dives into the growing population of canyon crowns within the United States. Rockefeller's solution: enslave them. The rationale: they are neither human nor animal, merely the end result of criminal activity. This German demand for crowns to lift their Rockefeller airships revitalized the American economy, which ultimately came at the cost of thousands upon thousands of American and European lives as the Germans continued their war efforts during the Great War.
But by 1918, Rockefeller bombing raids would have killed thousands of American and European soldiers. My terms were over before I could take action against the Germans. It was the administration after my own which was tasked with the seemingly impossible mission of destroying the Rockefellers while preserving the reputation of the former president.
Rockefeller and then President Hughes then set about destroying every Rockefeller ship while concealing Rockefeller's involvement in the German military operation and in the enslavement of canyon crowns. However, the truth eventually came to light, not too long after the events depicted in the Rockefeller tree tragedy video.
Outside the center, there had once been my supporters. Now, they want me executed. The policemen have kept the crowds at bay, though I believe that my assassination is, like the revelation, inevitable.
Alongside Rockefeller's narrative, several diagrams and blueprints are shown. The blueprints of the Luftschiff Rockefeller 70, a German blimp used as an aerial warship, is depicted. The interior appears to be filled with heads, canyon crowns to be specific. Another diagram is shown, this one of an anti-airship death ray, with the sights pointed straight at the canyon crown trapped inside. The weapon shows Operation Pyramid Plasma, in which an anti-airship device is placed atop the Pyramid of Giza. This operation had unforeseen side effects. Stage 1 is disintegration. Stage 2 is ambulation. And Stage 3 is amalgamation, wherein the confused particles of destroyed men fuse into one entity. Stage 4 sees the amalgamation of a man return to their homeland, in which they carry out Stage 5, the counterattack. First off, I want to point out that the photographs viewed in both Rockefeller Revelation and the Rockefeller Tree Tragedy are exactly the same. These same spectral entities hiding in the background. The story is incredibly well executed and planned, and the attention to detail is phenomenal. The video itself reveals more lore about the exact fate of Canyon crowns, specifically crowns that existed prior to 1918. They were enslaved and used in warfare before being eradicated along with the Rockefeller airships. We now know that the Giza glass, if put atop the Pyramid of Giza and siphoning off the energy of a special tree, can become a plasma beam with incredible destructive power, disintegrating the soldiers manning the weapon. Due to the properties of Giza glass, we do know that these individuals would retain their consciousness in their scattered molecules. Their combined corporeal form also seems rather similar to the Air Force One Angel seen all the way back in Season 1. If it is the same entity, their attempts at provoking or infecting the monuments in Season 1 could be another step in their scheme for revenge. In the Century, Virginia Arnoldson gives a more complete recounting of the Rockefeller Tree Tragedy. After being hit by the tree's lightning, Virginia awoke in a field of special trees.
The trees looked like they ended, but above them there were upside down trees, and above those there were upright trees, like they were being reflected forever. The pattern repeated for as far as I could see.
The ground was a thin layer of dust, and below that, the same repeating trees. In the distance, footsteps drew closer, and from the trees emerged people. One man, who Virginia would name Everett, approached Virginia and whispered, "The trees are not trees." The pair stayed together.
I promise I will not leave you.
With each subsequent flash of lightning, the pair would be somewhere else, doing something else, over and over. Remnants of people who tried climbing trees, known as climbers to Virginia, were stretched along the trees' trunks. Their bodies were likely distorted as the flashes attempted to move them to another location. Then, one day in the some 500 years Virginia was trapped in the other world, she was back in New York. New York.
Well, this was another New York. I did something wrong, and I lost on it. I ruined everything. I should have stayed home that night. Why did I not stay home? I lost everything. For me and my friends, I ruined their lives.
Virginia's parents, recognizing their daughter was noticeably different, left their daughter at an orphanage. It was a hard time for Virginia. Her father died of a broken heart, and her mother lived as a recluse. Virginia eventually visited the tree atop the Rockefeller Center. The tree told her she could return to her Earth in exchange for one life.
And I spoke to her. At first, I could not understand her. Her voice was like a breeze behind my eyes. It was cold and I could not move. But soon I could understand. She said that I had to be ready to exchange one life for my own. She understood that I wanted to go back home, to my New York. She said, come back in 3 years. And I did. I waited 1,095 days.
9 years later, and being told to come back time and time again, Virginia, after finding love and becoming pregnant with her son Everett, is given directions by the tree.
It was inside for 9 months when I saw the tree again. She put directions in my head. I followed those directions. I walked for 4 days. I had to. I wanted to go home so badly. The Washington Monument looked much bigger in person. Its door went up high, like it was for something much bigger. Then I went inside. There were bodies everywhere. The breeze told me to relax. I went on the elevator. It went up. All the way up. It stopped at the top, and the music blared. It was so loud I could not move. The floor opened, and I fell all the way down. I felt myself hit the ground. Then I kept drifting down, past the ground, past rock, sand, and magma, through the layers of earth. It must have been years. It felt like 500 years. When I reached the other side, and I felt myself rising through all the layers of earth, past the magma, sand, and rock, past the ground, back into a body, another body, almost the same body, and flattened like a little red pancake. But I felt so empty. My belly had sunk. Little Everett was not with me anymore.
Her price for going home? Her unborn son, Everett. She, along with others, bled into the ground of the monument for years, feeding the special tree. Then, one day the tree became free, and so too did she, in the year 2003.
They told me it was 2003.
However, the video contradicts this claim by stating Virginia died in 1980. The final text reveals that her son, the unborn Everett, is the 20th Washington absentee. This entry reveals a lot about Virginia Arnoldson and connects to several older videos. First, the video greatly expands upon the lore of the special tree dimension, with further arguments made against the trees being, well, trees. Several references and questions left in the Washington Wormhole video are answered in this entry as well. The method through which Virginia returns to Earth is featured in this video, rising up through a lift before being dropped down to the floor. Additionally, we now know the tree was feeding off of Virginia and the other absentees' blood over the years as a method of sustaining itself. However, when it is freed by the end of Washington Wormhole, due to the infection mentioned in Season 1, those it had been feeding upon were freed as well. This leads to Virginia awakening in the year 2003. My speculation is that the other Virginia, the one that took this Virginia's place, died back in 1980 at the age of 59. However, our Virginia is considered one of the 20 Washington absentees and awoke in this reality in 2003. This would explain the inconsistent death dates. That, or this Virginia experienced time travel that has not yet been explained. The life Virginia gave in exchange for her own, her unborn son Everett, appears to be the entity roaming the special tree dimension, or the Washington Zone as it is called, and the 20th Washington absentee. This solves the lingering mystery from the first season's revelation. Finally, the possible feeding off of the blood of the Washington absentees again lends credence to the horned serpent theory. Maybe not a 100% match, but enough that it makes sense for the government to draw the illusion when creating the project name. This entry recreates the shooting down of Air Force One after the Angel took control. Following the Angel's transmission of the unidentified infection as seen in Season 1, the monuments began to grow and attack. Because of this, the United States was split into 3 distinct zones: the Alcatraz Zone, the Rushmore Zone, and the Washington Zone, with the 3 zones being referred to as Ex Tribus Unum, or Act of 3, 1. The video then cuts to an image of a rotating egg imposed in a dark background. The video refers to the true ruler within the Earth, and that this god needs to leave. The Earth is a shell that must be fractured and split open, and with this fractured Earth, the United States would be reborn with the guidance of the fallen angel, who was confirmed to be the amalgamation created after the death ray blast. The group claims the Angel will evict the Horned Serpent in the same way that Angel evicted Rockefeller from reality. On screen, an Orphic egg is shown. Text reads of the unification of 1980, noting that this was short-lived. However, due to the extent of the unification of 2003, the state borders are not expected to be restored within the century. The ADA refuses to recognize the 3 zones. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's start with the historical aspect. In 1980, when Maze was attacked by the cosmic forces at play, a unification occurred in which the country was divided into different zones. However, this only lasted a decade and ended after the last personal computer was shut down, ending the unification. After this, the states returned to the original borders until 2003, when Alcatraz Island, Mount Rushmore, and the Washington Monument began to attack and spread. This instigated another unification in 2003, one that currently sees no end. This new organization of zones uses the motto of Ex Tribus Unum, a play on the original US motto of E Pluribus Unum. To continue the wordplay, the new capitals of these zones are based around indigenous peoples' tribes, languages, and ancestral locations. Owaste, an Ohlone tribe of the San Francisco Peninsula and near where Alcatraz Island is located. Bahasapa, which is a Lakota Sioux name of the Black Hills, a sacred site considered to be the center of their universe, and, unfortunately, the location of Mount Rushmore. Anakashtank, an Algonquin tribe and village that once existed in the Washington, D.C. area, where the Washington Monument resides. Not only is this a form of wordplay with the word tribus, but it also strengthens the connection to the indigenous mythology through the Horned Serpent, or Onyare. Next, the advocates for the division of America refer to a deity within the Earth, calling the Earth an egg from which it must hatch from. This organization wants this to occur with the help of the Angel, hoping to worsen the spread of the monuments to ensure the god's hatching. The group appears to believe in normalcy without the interference of this god. However, it appears that this eruption from the Earth might just destroy it. The group uses the imagery of the Orphic egg, an ancient Greek symbol referring to the Orphic tradition, or the world egg, in which the primordial deity Aphanes, the Protagonist, was born. This deity, along with the egg, is often depicted with serpent-like creatures around it. This deity is the god of creation, with the name Phanes meaning to bring light or to shine. An ancient Orphic hymn addresses him as follows: Ineffable, hidden, brilliant scion, whose motion is whirring, you scattered the dark mist that lay before your eyes, and, flapping your wings, you whirled about. And through this world, you brought pure light. The true scale of the forces at play come into scope for the first time. And honestly, this reality seems even more terrifying. It appears that within the Earth, the Horned Serpent resides. The creature that has been terrorizing this reality for centuries seems to be this entity alluded to time and time again in this series. Now, this latest entry seals this into place. Somehow, a massive horned serpent, and Onyare exists within the Earth and stretches through these monuments in the Serpentine constellation mapped out in the MAIZEMOVIEMAKER video. We can say for absolute certainty that the shape seen within the Liberty Lurker video for a few momentary frames is likely our horned serpent himself. What exactly it is, what it wants, is unclear. All we know at this point in the series is that Project Horned Serpents appears to be a plan to appease this deity trapped within its Earth egg. The Statue of Progress, a colossal sculpture at the entryway of the Suez Canal in Port Said, Egypt. Progress was designed by Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, who later designed the Statue of Liberty. An interview with Ferdinand de Lesseps, the developer of the Suez Canal, dominates the first half of the video. Lesseps discusses his drive for efficiency, believing happiness can be derived from it. This desire led to the Suez Canal Company with the goal of uniting Eastern and Western trade to pull them together in unity. Lesseps dives into his speech about saving time through the use of the Suez Canal and the success the future will bring. Lesseps was supposed to give the speech at the opening of the canal, but Lesseps never did. He did not choose to build the canal. The man beneath America ordered him to do it. Cut to the Book of Ferdinand 29:3. The sinking man in the forbidden fruit. A silhouette with an axe stands before a tree. The man cuts at the tree and sinks into the Washington zone. And he stretches, and stretches, and stretches into a serpentine form. The interview with Bartholdi, first told in the Season 1 episode of Liberty Lurker, is extended here. This time, Bartholdi explains that the pedestal of the statue, one that is far larger than the statue itself, is to hold him. He used to be human. George Washington, the founding father. President Grant called him the Horned Serpent, Onondaga, meaning devourer of villages and Iroquois, and he is locked up in the statue's pedestal. In 1985, a team of thonauts surveyed the environment beneath the pedestal. The following footage was recorded in what is known as the Horned Serpent metastructure, also known as Wonderland. Beneath this pedestal is the infinitely expanding Wonderland, or Washington Zone. This entry ties it all together. The primary antagonist, the entity behind the cosmic forces at play, is a horribly transformed George Washington. 2 Washingtons fell into Wonderland. One emerged in a frozen river but unchanged. The other climbed a tree, becoming stretched out and disfigured, like the climbers Virginia had seen within Wonderland. He becomes the Horned Serpent, the Onyare of Iroquois legend, the devourer of villages, held beneath the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, and given offerings to tide him over, to placate and control him. His body stretches throughout the continental United States, through the monuments, with the maze facilities being built to continue to feed this unholy abomination. It becomes a metaphor for America itself. Large, bloodthirsty, powerful, hungry for more and more and more. The signature sound of the Horned Serpent can be heard in older entries as well. The last entry must also be taken into account as well. The advocates for the division of America are plotting to unleash the Horned Serpent and likely destroy the Earth in the process. This in itself ties into biblical stories and imagery specifically surrounding the Antichrist. In this instance, given the naming scheme of the Horned Serpent and given the creatures trapped within the Earth, the cosmic entity duly fulfills the role of the beast of the sea and the beast from the Earth, as mentioned within the book of Revelation. If this illusion holds true, then the concept of the Antichrist may align less with James Dean, but the advocates for the division of America, as the group of people prophesies to oppose Jesus Christ, or, at least in symbolism alone, James Dean, a possible Christ-like figure. And within their opposing worship, the beasts of Revelation and the figure of Satan, the Horned Serpent. The Tree of Liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. President Thomas Jefferson. Part 1 is the final upload of Dr. Disturbing, detailing her father's favorite things. The Apotheosis of Washington by Constantino Brumidi. Road to Happiness by James Dean. Together by Virginia Arnoldson. Lauren and Quinn Arnoldson were last seen riding 2 large balloons over the Grand Canyon. Both siblings fell to their death. Part 2. The last broadcast of the New Delaware Journal. On screen, a final message from Leonard W. Moreland. The Anti-Device Association held him captive for years. However, he made secret broadcasts as the Delaware Journal. Moreland relays that Alcatraz Island had spread inconceivably fast, changing all within its range. After tests, Moreland confirms he is not the same as he was only 3 days ago. All copied and replaced. The US became the ship of Theseus. Moreland then ends his own life after asking to be remembered. For Everett. For Virginia. For America. Thonot A will receive and transmit the data once it crosses over into the Nixonverse. The Angel's Ultimatum. After a 2-decade search, the Angel is located in the Babylon Forest. Part 4. Operation Thunderbird. The Iroquois mythological beast that is the sworn enemy of the Onyare, the Horned Serpent. The Department of Technology created the following animation. The simulation shows the department luring freedom to the false children, which react in the statue's presence, and, with an invisible particle cloud, entrap freedom. Freedom is then taken, Freedom is then taken to the Babylon Forest to engage with Angel in mutually assured destruction. Part 5. Unnamed. Let's quickly analyze this episode before diving into a chronological overview of the events that have transpired. First, the apotheosis of Washington, an 1865 painting, depicts Washington as almost a deity-like entity, similar to how he's depicted in the series after his transformation. The James Dean painting is actually a real painting he's done, and it just so happens to look strikingly similar to the special trees. The large balloons Lauren and Quinn were seen riding were most likely the CANYONCROWN floating heads of both Nathaniel and Maya. The question is then raised if their deaths were truly accidental, premeditated, or intentional jumps. Leonard Moreland, who is the husband of a virgin of Virginia, relays the extent to which the Alcatraz infection has spread. The comment on his cells having been replaced, and the comment on the self-immolation, is a reference to John Carpenter's The Thing. The Thonaut, receiving the data in the Nixonverse, is none other than the fictional version of the channel's creator, Alex Casanas. Here, his role is to relay the fate of the Deanverse reality to the Nixonverse, in hopes that they do not make the same mistakes. Angel's ultimatum also points out how Angel destroyed the splinter group of the ADA, burning them to ash for being deranged in their beliefs and for trying to use them as a weapon once more. This ultimatum, demanding peace, directly leads to the end of the world scenario. Operation Thunderbird, which again is the mythological enemy to the Anyare, or horned serpents, in indigenous mythology, attempts to pit Freedom against Angel in an attempt to destroy both. This is similar in nature to the gathering of armies for the final battle during the end times of Armageddon, as mentioned within the book of Revelation. Their bout ultimately leads to the horned serpent gaining freedom and breaking through the earth, ending it all entirely in a final end of the world scenario. The video ends on one final note. The survivors of this reality are transformed into a new race called the Corner Folk, but that is a conversation for another time. Long ago, special trees began to propagate on Earth. Whether these are the result of extra-dimensional or extraterrestrial intervention is unclear due to ADA propaganda. As humans begin to populate the Earth, the cosmic properties caused unforeseen side effects for mankind. Strikes of lightning would strike the sands in the Egyptian desert, creating a natural Giza glass. This glass was used in order to curb the growth of these trees. However, these only served to mitigate their own growth, not to stop them entirely, causing them to build structures around them to contain them and their damaging properties. Over thousands of years, mankind came into contact with these special trees, which sang music to them and whispered into their ears, transporting them away to a kind of wonderland of chaos and bright flashes of electric light. At some point in early United States history, President George Washington came into contact with a special tree, both in this reality and in others. Upon being transported into Wonderland, one version of Washington tried to climb between the planes of reality. This in turn distorts him, imbuing him with energy and power beyond what any mortal could handle. This turns him into the god, the Horned Serpent. Two Washingtons are spit out into the Deanverse main reality. One version ends up frozen in a river in the future, while one returns close to his origin, however distorted and unholy he might be. In 1848, construction of the Washington Monument began in order to contain a growing special tree in the nation's capital. In 1858, the United States government commissioned Thomas Crawford, an Italian sculptor, to create a statue for the Capitol building. While creating the statue, Crawford began using Giza glass. This glass, imbued with supernatural properties, allowed Thomas to slowly transfer his and his daughter's life essence into the statue to achieve a semblance of eternal life, and to strike at an America he now eternally hates. Freedom is then transported and held atop the Capitol building. By the late 1870s, British Egyptologist Flinders Petrie would also gain knowledge of Giza glass. Petrie accurately predicts when the cosmic lightning would strike in Egypt and goes to collect the glass. While collecting and transporting the glass, Petrie slipped and became decapitated by a sheet of glass. However, due to the properties of said glass, Petrie did not die. Instead, his head swelled and grew with a discolored look until becoming one of the first canyon crowns. In 1870, the Horned Serpent returns with terrifying size and telepathic powers, and President Grant needs a solution for containing the deity. He commissions Frederick August Bartholdi to create the Statue of Liberty, asking for a large base pedestal to house the head of the Horned Serpent in the Wonderland metastructure. For 4 years, the Horned Serpent continued to grow and morph until finally subsiding. In 1886, the statue would finally be completed, and it would take Bartholdi years, until 1889, in an interview many considered to be fake, to reveal what he had done, what he had helped keep captive in the pedestal. By 1886, construction on the Washington Monument was completed, and by 1910, it became a popular tourist attraction. Visitors are beckoned close and to listen to the music within the walls. Over the next 60 years, 20 individuals would disappear while visiting the Washington Monument, transported away by the special tree's cosmic properties. In 1889, the Giza glass collected by Flinders Petrie arrives in shards to England. Seeing the glass as worthless, the British government hands off the shards to American ambassadors. Then President Rockefeller, seeing the potential of the shards, has them crafted into swords for sentient statues. These Giza guardians would then stand guard at the Grand Canyon, guarding it from trespassers with these swords. However, these statues would inadvertently create an epidemic of canyon crowns. Later that decade, President Rockefeller realized the growing problem with the canyon crowns. Rockefeller engineered a plan to sell the crowns into slavery to the German military. The crowns would be forced into servitude by being put into blimps, nicknamed Rockefellers, in order to keep them afloat. However, by 1918, the German military began using the blimps in order to wage war and bomb cities. Rockefeller, understanding the optics, immediately set about destroying the blimps and keeping his involvement under wraps with the assistance of the next sitting president, President Hughes. This would involve the creation of an anti-airship death ray using Giza glass. This would use the power of the Giza pyramids and the special trees to power it, but at the cost of the lives of the soldiers using it. These soldiers, unable to die due to the properties of the Giza glass, would slowly reform their molecules into what would later be known as the Angel. It would take around 20 years for the men to exact their revenge. In 1934, Rockefeller selects a special tree for the Rockefeller Center's annual Christmas tree. While getting the tree decorated, one Virginia Arnoldson, along with 10 of her friends, would attempt to place a star atop the tree. The special tree reacts, hitting all 10 with lightning and sending them to a world known by many names: the Washington Zone, the Horned Serpent metastructure, or Wonderland. Virginia would see trees as far as she could see, extending upwards in inverted imagery and downwards in the same fashion. Virginia would be approached by a man she named Everett, who would keep her safe for what felt like 500 years. While there, Virginia would see the remains of people who attempted to climb between layers, for their bodies to become distorted and spread throughout realities. Then, one day, every single tree in Wonderland bent, and Virginia was brought home. Only this wasn't home, but another reality altogether. This Virginia had been transported from the so-called Nixonverse, a parallel to our reality, into the Deanverse. Meanwhile, the Virginia of the Deanverse similarly wound up in the Nixonverse. While the Virginia in the Deanverse remained in her family, the Virginia transported to the Nixonverse was put into an orphanage. 3 years later, in 1937, Rockefeller's involvement with the creation of the Rockefeller blimps and the Rockefeller Center tragedy is publicly known. The 17 soldiers successfully recorporealize and execute a counterattack against Rockefeller, vaporizing him on May 23, 1937, after years of stalking Rockefeller and waiting for the truth to be revealed. 1939, the Virginia stuck in the Nixonverse leaves the orphanage to find her father died from a broken heart, and her mother a recluse. Desiring to leave the Nixonverse and return to the Deanverse, the primary reality, she finds a special tree previously in the Rockefeller Center now roams New York City. The special tree would require a sacrifice in order to take her back, one she was not yet ready to give. After 9 years, in 1948, the Virginia in the Nixonverse falls in love and becomes pregnant, and finally, the special tree gives her directions in order to return to her reality. Virginia makes a trek to the Washington Monument, takes a secret passageway into the interior, is taken up into a lift, and is dropped to the floor. Her soul is ejected from her body and sent what felt like 500 years into a mutilated version of her body in the Deanverse, one without her unborn child, Everett, who, due to her actions, becomes eternally lost in Wonderland. Virginia, along with 18 others, would remain bleeding into the floor of the monument for decades to come, unable to die. In 1949, the Statue of Liberty underwent extensive renovations that would allow the entire statue to roll on wheels and an axis in order to open up the interior. Along with this, a waste storage area would be created in the depths of the statue's pedestal. During the summer of 1954, visitors passing through Ellis Island would remark on the intense foul odor coming from the statue itself. Eleonora Bramante would liken the smell to that of a slaughterhouse. As she would see later when lines of people were sent to the statue's pedestal, the statue was exactly that, a slaughterhouse, one meant to pacify the horned serpent with blood sacrifices. Similarly, during the 1950s, the island of Alcatraz develops a kind of magnified bacterial infection. This infection, over the course of the next 50 years, begins to grow in size and scope. Scientists predict that it will make landfall in San Francisco and spread its infection by the 2000s. 1960, Rob Carriers and Bob Rotroba found maze machines and began opening manufacturing plants across the United States until 1971. These factories would have tunnels leading into systems of caves housing parts of the horned serpent. Evidence suggests that the serpent would be fed regularly. The election cycle of 1967-68 would see actor James Dean win the presidency. That same year, the Anti-Dean Association sprung up in opposition to Dean's bid for the presidency and often depicted Dean with horns. This intense opposition to Dean's administration would only grow in intensity over the course of his terms and over the next several decades. Several events occurred in the year 1969. First, the US government shuts down Project GIZAGUARDIAN, though sightings still persist throughout the decades. Second, the Anti-Dean Association broadcast an anti-Dean advert. Immediately following this, air raid sirens across the country began blaring at deafening and lethal levels, killing and deafening thousands of Americans, including President Dean. Anti-Dean associates would be rounded up and relocated to national monuments as a, quote, return to American normalcy. These, quote, terrorists will be sent through the special trees in order to be given a doppelganger with no criminal affiliations. Dean would receive a hearing implant through maze machines and conceives a new federal department to head technological development. President Dean then establishes the Department of Technology to unite all major American computer corporations and allocates billions of dollars towards technological advancement. In 1970, Mays produces the personal video camera and home computer, and in 1972, Mays collaborates with the Department of Defense to initiate the first system to control the True Forces of Mass Destruction, or TFMDs. This system is labeled Project Horned Serpent after the Unyare. During this same year, in the creation of this project, classified documents were leaked that revealed the internal workings of the Washington Monument and how sacrifices were given to the special tree. In December of 1976, 2 Delaware fishermen discovered a George Washington doppelganger frozen in ice, either having been transported through time or frozen in ice upon his return. This sets in stone the possibility for two doppelgangers to exist in one reality, one as a Washington out of time, and the other as a Lovecraftian deity. On January 6, 1977, the Anti-Dean Association storms the U.S. Capitol, shooting down the Freedom statue in the process. This act awakens the slumbering souls of Thomas and Nina Crawford, which spurs the statue to then wreak havoc with its Giza glass blade, causing over 150 casualties. At some point following this act, Freedom is then moved to the Grand Canyon for safety purposes, along with the canyon crowns it created. That same year, STFR 4.0399 is leaked to the public. The document details the plans for attracting and extinguishing ADA members and other curious persons to protect May's assets. This plan involved decapitating dissidents in the Grand Canyon. In 1980, the Virginia Arnoldson who became stuck in the Deanverse in 1934 dies at the age of 59 after having two kids, Nathaniel and Maya Arnoldson. That same year, Mays, along with May's personal computers, are attacked by the Horned Serpent in the special trees. After this, all PCs are systematically destroyed. Despite this, a unification event still occurs, in which the United States is split up into distinct zones, each under the influence of a particular volatile monument. In 1985, during this period of unification, the Liberty Lurker would emerge from the statue for the first time. This would mark the closest destruction the world would see for decades. Following this, Thaunauts surveyed the environment beneath the Statue of Liberty, discovering the Horned Serpent metastructure, or Wonderland, seen by Virginia Arnoldson and countless others. By 1990, the final PC is shut down on national television, and the unification of 1980 ends. The United States returns to its original form, and normalcy is somewhat reestablished in the country. Monuments return to their original states for one final decade of peace, before it all starts to fall apart once more. In 2000, Maze re-implements computer technology with the MAIZEMOVIEMAKER, which seems to kick off another descent into unification through the use of technology. At some point this year, the Washington Monument is vandalized with an ominous message. The infection is nigh, the music of Washington will end. The year 2003 sees a lot of events occur in a short time frame. Maya and Nathaniel, children of the version of Virginia trapped in the Deanverse, vandalize a closed maze factory and explore the cave system underneath, connecting to the Horned Serpent in order to spread their wording of the monuments and their significance. August 7th of this year, Mount Rushmore was vandalized with cryptic messages. A week later, more messages appeared. I will introduce infection next week, Monday through Sunday, 10:12 to 10:13 p.m. Watch the symptoms. On August 17th, the Air Force One Angel, the cellular amalgamation of the 17 soldiers who were vaporized back in 1918 by the anti-airship death ray, hijacks the plane and drops infections onto selected monuments. The US government ultimately shoots the plane and the Angel down. The special tree within the Washington Monument, a particularly large and powerful one, breaks free from the confines of the structure. Because of this, the Virginia Arnoldson that had escaped from the Nixonverse back into the Deanverse is freed from her confinement within the Washington Monument, along with the rest of the Washington absentees, save for her unborn son, Everett. Alcatraz Island, after receiving the infection sent down by the Angel, begins to multiply and spread at a rapid rate. This sudden and inexplicable attack baffled the scientific community, and the ensuing spread of Alcatraz would continue for the foreseeable future. The next week would also see Mount Rushmore slowly morph and transform as special tree-like spires extend from the faces of past leaders. The United States is then legally split in the United Zones of America after the infection took hold and spurred the monuments into action. The three zones, Alcatraz, Rushmore, and Washington, continued to grow over the next 20 or so years. This would be the second unification event the United States would see, labeled as the Unification of 2003. After the unification event, the advocates for the division of America splinters from the Anti-Device Association and advocates for the splitting of the Earth as a world egg in order to rid the Earth of the Horned Serpent. Only through this, the group believes, can peace be achieved. With the help of the Angel, the group moves to achieve this goal. However, the Angel itself destroys the advocates for the division of America, calling them deranged and requesting that all TFMDs simply be left alone. In 2004, Maya Arnoldson is decapitated by Freedom during a truth-seeking expedition to an unmarked Grand Canyon path. Her body is later found, but her head never is. During a July 4th livestream in 2021, the STARRYSPHINX is streamed through the Maze News Network. During the broadcast, footage of false children are seen in action. This ultimately leads to the feed cutting out. This only sets in stone the worsening conditions on Earth and the ever-approaching apocalypse that hides just around the corner. This same year, the Arnoldsons take a trip to the Grand Canyon in order for Nathaniel to look for his missing sister Maya. Lauren, Nathaniel's daughter, records footage of what she believes to be Maya as a canyon crown. In May of 2021, Nathaniel is also decapitated and becomes a canyon crown. Within the next year, Lauren Arnoldson, taking the helm as Dr. Disturbing, would make one final upload regarding her father's favorite paintings. After this, she, along with her brother Quinn, would ride the canyon crowns of Nathaniel and Maya before falling to their deaths. In February of 2022, Leonard Moreland makes one final broadcast as a Delaware Journal, previously under the pen name of Howard Melrose. He relays all of the ADA's propaganda and conspiracies being forcibly pushed. He uses the journal as subtle opposition. Here, he relays that Alcatraz has spread far across the United States, replacing every single cell in his body and in everyone else's body. He notes that one final survivor, labeled Thaunaut A, or Alex Casanas, will receive and transmit the data of this video series to us. As one final act, he burns himself to death. In a final bid to rid the world of two deadly TFMDs with the potential to end the world as we know it, the US government enacts Operation Thunderbird on February 22nd, 2022. Freedom is then captured using false children and taken to the Babylon Forest to fight the Angel. This fight seals the fate of the world. In their ensuing battle, the world cracks open and the Horned Serpent is freed, along with bundles of special trees. Any survivors of this reality are thrown into the corner world and exist as corner folk. And here, the story ends. Or so it seems. The Last Son of Alcatraz. This video begins with the destruction of Earth as we've just seen. From the wreckage of humanity, a single form flees the universe. James Dean, the Last Son of Alcatraz.
Sometimes to protect us, sometimes to hurt, sometimes to scare and humiliate us. I believe one day that man will become a giant, conquer us all.
Faster than an airplane, more powerful than a locomotive, impervious to bullets.
Whether this is the start of the Monument Mythos Season 3, or the start of an entirely new series, The Last Son of Alcatraz picks up exactly where the series last left off. Humanity ends in the Deanverse. However, it appears two Thaunauts found their way into the Nixonverse. Alex Casanas and a transformed James Dean, now going by the name of The Last Son of Alcatraz. In this altered version of the Nixonverse, The Last Son of Alcatraz helped to stop the Second World War and seem to be involved in the Vietnam War the last we see. Now, the concept of a false prophet and a Christ-like figure come back into play. Superman himself, at least in his original interpretation, was a legitimate Christ figure in terms of DC Comics lore, with James Dean entering into this universe in a similar fashion to Kal-El as the last son of Alcatraz. The case is made for Dean being a Christ figure within this universe. However, as this new series plays out, we shall see if Dean remains this figure, or if the ADA's claims are slowly revealed to be true, and the last son of Alcatraz begins his fall and becoming a false prophet. Alex Casanas communicates to us a unique and horrifying tale, one of cosmic and world-ending proportions. From trees that act as gateways into other worlds and times, to sentient statues and recorporealized entities wreaking havoc upon the world, to cosmic horrors beyond our imaginations living beneath the earth. This series has unified an audience under the name of the monument Mythos. Alex's work in this series is phenomenal, and look forward to seeing what new horrors he unleashes upon the Nixonverse. And of course, this series could not have happened without the incredibly talented people working behind the scenes as well. Many talented voice actors and actresses have lent their talents to the successful and influential series. Sergio Farina as the Captain, D-Boy as Ferdinand de Lesseps, Baldwin W. as Philip Reed, and Alex Casanas himself as Howard Melrose gave exceptional performances in their respective videos. The mixture of languages, locations, and performances give an air of authenticity to the series. Molly Chen and Amber Fowler narrate the DEANDEMOCRACY and DEANDISASTER videos respectively. Both give wonderful voiceovers in this mockumentary format of a fictional president. Their performances pull the audience in and entrap them in the strange history they help to communicate. More notable performances include Georgia Pelichario. Georgia gives outstanding performances as Eleonora Bramante, Nina Crawford, and Louisa Crawford in the select videos she appears in. The Wandering Wanderer as Dr. Disturbing was an excellent casting. His voice sets the perfect tone for the strange documentaries he narrates over. Rohan Gary lends his voice as both Leonard W. Moreland and as the new Delaware/Delaware River Journal newscaster. Rowan, like with his many co-stars, gives truly exceptional performances. The two actors in particular, however, I'd like to cover Eliana Gallagher and Lev. Eliana plays the role of Virginia Arnoldson, both as a child and as an adult, and as the Maya Arnoldson that appears in Lincoln Looker. I truly did not realize Eliana played both young and old versions of the same character, and she does a phenomenal job with both. Gallagher sells the perspective of a naive child exceptionally well, and her performance as adult Virginia pulls such sympathy and empathy from the audience. You truly begin to feel for Virginia through her performance. Lev, as with Eliana, completely shocked me when I realized he not only played Rockefeller, but James Dean and Commissioner Morgan, and gave the special tree poem reading. Lev's vocal dynamics, range, and diversity are incredible, to put it simply. His performance as Rockefeller plays at that dignified age of wisdom filled with regret and guilt, and his interpretation of James Dean sells the image of an everyman kind of president, one that humbles himself in his position. To all these actors, excellent work. I'd also like to give praise to the crew working more behind the scenes. Jacob Sander, who played the first iteration of Frederick Bartholdi, Taroons, and Andrew Wilson, along with Sunset Warrior, worked on the music and sound design of the series. If there's one thing I'd like to praise, it's the sound design. It is truly haunting. Daniel Wilson was also responsible for creating the Operation Thunderbird and the End of the World animations. Darius also lent his talents in giving the audience the first real visual look at Wonderland. Finally, A.B. Hidalgo is mentioned as a special thanks from time to time, and as a creator of the Department of Technology seal. To all of you, and to Alex Casanas, thank you for the passion you infused into this series. It has truly paid off, and I hope to see more from you all in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.